Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to welcome Chuck English to the pod. Chuck is the founder of English Marketing Works, and Chuck's actually somebody I have collaborated with for a long time. Like we may go 10, 15 years back at this point. Always have really admired Chuck's perspectives on enrollment and enrollment marketing. Has really keen insights into family expectations and how do you create really great kind of marketing experiences for families. And he's also a prolific writer. If you should go over to his website, I'll put a link to it in the show notes below, and you can see his blog and all the great articles that he has there. And we're going to actually dig into one of those in just a little bit. This is a marketing focused pod, which is always something I really enjoy talking about. So with all that, Chuck English, my friend, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me. It's great.
Well, it's my pleasure, and it's long overdue. Hey, but before we get going, can you introduce yourself and English Marketing Works, and just share a little bit about the work that you do with independent schools?
Sure. I work with independent schools these days. I'm more and more these days. I think that I am. You can pick your words here, but the word that I'm using most recently, is a kind of tip of the hat to Seth Godin, but is helping schools find out what really makes them remarkable, and then being able to use those insights for strategy and position and messaging, all as it relates to pretty much all as it relates to enrollment.
Chuck, you recently wrote a post entitled 11 Signs Your School Marketing Needs More Strategy. And you have this great image in there where you have a character who's flung himself upon a horse and then rode madly off in all directions. That's a pretty vivid way to describe tactics without strategy. So I guess my question as we get started is, when you walk into a school, how often do you see that exact thing happening? And in your mind, like, why does it happen?
Um, Most often, like most of the schools I think that I walk into are to a greater or larger extent doing exactly that, running, kind of running off in all directions. And I think
Yeah.
that ultimately, I think that there's two reasons. The biggest of the two is time. If you're, if you're the one person Marcom director at a school, your day is going to be made up of everything from the third grade PE teacher wanting to know how to get a logo on a T-shirt, to the crisis communication about somebody who did something over the weekend that they ought not to have done. And so just having that time is really incredible. It's interesting because you were talking about Brendan, but on the Marcom Society, in the most recent survey that they did, they asked people how much time that they spend on strategy versus tactics. And if you just look at the numbers straight up, it was interesting because I think it was like 57% of the people said that they're 25 strategy, 75 tactical.
Mm.
And there was actually like 3% who said it was like 0 strategy and 100 tactical.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
But if you actually factor out the people who didn't reply, there's like 30, a big percentage of people that just said NA. I don't know what that means, but anyway, it turns out that like 75% of the people responded to that question are spending somewhere between 0 and 25% on strategy. So, I think time is just like this huge factor that makes it hard. And when I talk to, enrollment directors and marketing directors about enrollment marketing, they all say, almost all of them say they'd love to be more strategic in what they're doing. They recognize it as a liability.
Yeah, it's interesting. I 100% agree with you on the time component. Like, if you just think about all the things, like if you think of the to-do list for a marketing person, It's immense. You've got your social, you've gotta write the newsletter, you've gotta do the annual report, the alumni magazines, the website, like, just keep going down the line, and it's all in service of not just a single office, but yet you're servicing every office at the school.
Hmm.
Academics,
Yeah.
operations, like, everyone, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're touching every aspect of the school
Right.
with your work. There's just so many things that they have to do every single day that it's really hard to carve out the time to be strategic. I mean, I've just seen that kinda over and over and over again, and I've lived that in my life in certain roles that I've had. Like, it's hard to carve out that time, which is why, a little plug for myself here, but it's why I'm so passionate about helping schools build systems in order to carve out that strategic time. Um,
Peter, what I would say though is this: is that there's a I think, and you'll understand this from a strategy point of view in terms of what you're doing, and strategy is the art of this article, this blog post we're talking about is all about strategy, so
yeah,
it's near and dear to my heart too. Is that, but there's a difference between having a plan and a strategy.
sure.
And I think that, so what I see is that yes, people that work in schools they want to have a plan, they want to know what's coming next. They don't, the idea of sort of flying by the seat of your pants is not is not something that people enjoy. Um, but having a plan isn't, like I said, isn't necessarily the same thing as a strategy. So
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
I think, and this is something I've written a lot about. I'm not saying this with 100% confidence, but I have had enough conversations to kind of to focus in on the fact that we're really good at adding things, we're really bad at taking away. And so as we add, it squeezes out our ability to be
Yeah.
strategic. So being smart about what you sunset and what you keep is I think a real opportunity for schools. Like, okay, hey, we're gonna survey all the things that we do. We're finding that these things don't have big impact. We're just gonna put those to the side and we're gonna focus on the things that do. Like, it's a good exercise to go through annually as have a little bit of downtime, probably in the summer as you're thinking about the year ahead. Hey, in the article, two things really stood out to me. One is that messaging that is inconsistent across channels and different stakeholders describing the school differently. Um, how much? I mean, what kind of impact does that have on enrollment? Like, if we're inconsistent, what's actually the byproduct on the other end? And do you think it's something that can be fixed?
What's the byproduct of that? I think that it depends on how people are interacting with the school. But I think that it's anything from skepticism to distrust to lack of patience. So, as an example, if I'm on a school website and I don't know, everything's kind of all over the place, and I'm really the messaging is different. Every place I go, or it could even be in every paragraph. I you know what I might just get out of there. I might just say, what, this just isn't making a lot of sense to me. This is a little all over the place. And you know what, I think a lot of that just kind of happens subconsciously too. I don't know that people are necessarily aware that they're making those decisions for those reasons, but that certainly happens. I think there's obviously distrust. I mean, if you talk to, and by the way, this can, we're talking about enrollment, so this is we're talking about retention and recruitment. So if I'm a current parent and I'm talking to a teacher, an administrator, and a trustee, and each of them is giving me their own idea of whatever, maybe it's the future of the school or what the school's really all about or things like that, I might look at that and say, well, like, what's going on here, right? I mean, and does the right hand know what the left hand's doing? So I think that there is certainly nothing positive that that comes out of that. And how to fix it, is that the second part?
Yeah, I mean, if you recognize it, what are some things that folks can do?
I think that it is um primarily, I would say, it is filling the vacuum. So and what I mean by that is that schools are highly personal organizations. So parents and trustees these days, notwithstanding the best advice of various organizations, many boards are still comprised of current parents, and so it's very personal. And if there's nothing else, people will default to their personal views of what the priorities of the school are, what the future of the school is, what the school should be doing. And that's true, by the way, of teachers and administrators as well. Like, everybody has their own idea about all of those things. If there is nothing that kind of ladders up on that, there's nothing that says, here's something that we can all, kind of talk about, then that's when you get that kind of cacophony of messages. So I think the point is to fill the vacuum. I think the point is to provide people with messaging, with ways of talking about the school, with concepts that they feel comfortable with, that make sense to them, that resonate
Yeah.
with them.
It
Uh,
reminds me of a conversation that I had on the pod with Brett Jacobson, who's the president of SAIS, and he talks about the power of like a shared vocabulary, shared language,
lexicon is
right?
that's a when that's it's a huge element of branding. It's culture. I mean, all of those things, right,
Yeah.
are become shared experiences. But again, I mean, if there has to be something that unites all of these people, and if
Yep.
and oftentimes when there isn't, that's when you get all these individual voices.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things you talked about in the article as well is a difference between communication that informs and communication that persuades. First off, I'd love for you to kind of break that down by what you mean, and then how would you shift from one to the other?
So, communication that informs and communication that persuades. In a way, this is a kind of, I think this is a kind of symptom of the kind of inside out thinking, the inside out communication thinking that schools often do. And uh, and also their belief that parents make rational decisions and not emotional decisions. So those two things kind of come together, and messaging that informs, kind of believes that if you provide people with all of this, information, all of the data about the school, all of the resources, and the number of fields and STEM labs, and yada yada, and college acceptances, and all of those things, that people will be impressed. But it isn't necessarily the same information that persuades. Things that persuade, you know have to be more personal. It has to be something that people can relate to them and their children, and how that's going to make a difference to them. And it's that speaks to what I said before, which is that people make these decisions emotionally. Lots of studies about that, lots of scientific studies about that,
Yeah.
and so messaging that persuades really does that, really really kind of hones in on those kinds of factors. And ultimately, I think it's I see it as a matter of empathy, right? I mean, if you're a definition of empathy obviously is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. But if you do that, I mean, if you're really prepared to do that, if you're really prepared to look at the market at your school from the perspective of a prospective parent, or even a current parent, but I mean, and you're willing to do it, without fooling yourself, without sort of rose-colored glasses, then I think that it gets much easier to develop messaging that persuades.
Yeah. And I know in the article you also talk about, the tendency to maybe use speak versus, what parent, talking the language of parents. I know that there's often a disconnect between those two. Like we think about things one way, but parents are thinking about it a different, and being able to translate that successfully. Um, yeah, do you think that's a habit that can be broken?
Yes, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Um,
It
I
is
mean,
hard, right? Because
it
we're talking about it this way all day long, and we're
right,
like, "Oh, well, this is how we talk about it." But parents are like, "I'm new to this. I don't really
right.
understand exactly all the terminology." And happens in industries all over the place, right? This isn't unique to ours for sure.
100%. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard. And if you think about it from the point of view of marketing and enrollment people, right? I mean, it's hard for them because
Yeah.
they might like I think sometimes what happens is that people, marketing and enrollment people have this intuitive sense that there's a disconnect, but it's hard to really push people on saying things differently. And I know that when I've worked with schools and I've worked inside schools, I've had to say to people, okay, what do you mean by that, and explain that to me, and what different tell me what difference that would make in the life of a student, the life of a parent. Like, let me really understand that so that I can then translate that into something that might make more sense. So it is really hard, and there is this tendency to fall back on it.
Chuck, you've done a lot of qualitative research, right? I know you do focus groups at a lot of the schools that you work with. As you're going through that process, at some point, you're going to turn back to the school and say, "Hey, this is what we've learned. This is what families are telling us." I mean, what surprises leaders the most when they hear that feedback?
I From my experience, I would say two things with regard to that. One is that there's rarely been a time when parents have said something that totally took leaders by surprise. So if it, whether that's positive, negative, whatever, whatever it might be, it's rare that I've presented a report on that kind of research to have people say, "Oh, we didn't know that." So,
Mm,
but I think that the missing link, if you will, that what is that, and this really relates to what we were just talking about, which is that parents look at this very personally. They don't see the scope. They don't see the trend. They don't see the continuum, right? They don't see that. They see the experience of their child in her class, this day, this week,
yeah.
this month, right? And they don't see this as scaffolding, the future of. I mean, it's really hard for them to see that, and I do find that leaders sometimes don't have to be reminded of that, have to be told. Parents don't get that, and they're surprised, like, they because it's also clear to them. And so, a great example of this is in progressive schools, right? So, because what'll happen in really progressive schools is that you'll have grade 3 parents saying, why can't my kid spell, right? Or I can't believe that you're letting my kid write sentences in this kind of way. And teachers, administrators will, like, then say, no, 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 it's okay, it's okay, we're going to layer things, and but parents don't get it, right? They see the here and now, and it's really hard for them to see that. And so I think that is often the biggest gap that I see.
Yeah. A couple more questions as we begin to wrap up. I'm curious, if when you're talking to heads of school and they're trying to understand how's the machine working? Like, are we successful? Is the marketing successful? What, where are we strong? Where are there gaps? Where are there things that we can do to improve? What kind of data should the head be looking at to understand where they sit?
I think pipeline data.
Yeah.
Pipeline data, pipeline ratios, I think are more than data. Like don't tell me, don't tell me how many people came, how many people inquired and toured and all those things. Give me the ratios and benchmark that for me against previous years, so that I have some sense of what that means. So, if tell me in how does that compare to 3 years ago, where our enrollment was 10% higher than it is now? Like, I need to understand that, and to me that is probably the most important data that a head could want to look at. And I mean, I think that boards, trustees should be looking at that as well. There could be financial data that you're looking at, but I think that I think that that's secondary. I think that the primary that would be the primary thing for me, would be pipeline ratios, where because that's sales data, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, uh, enrollment, admissions is a sales cycle, and you need to know where you stand, and it has to, and like I said, it has to be benchmarked. And if you
Right.
could benchmark it, I mean, if you were working with if you're working, maybe you're using Dazzle, NAS Dazzle data, or anybody else, if you can benchmark it against other schools of similar sizes and grade ranges and things like that, then that's even better. But
Yeah. If a head reads your article and they see, hey, there are 3 or 4 things here that I'm like, okay, kind of seeing them. I'm seeing my my flag is up. My red flag is up. Like, I'm a little concerned. What's the first thing that they should do?
um I would say two things. One is, clearly they need to start meeting more often with their marketing, their enrollment marketing, their marketing people, their enrollment people. I think that um, I think that if heads were in touch with this, then there wouldn't be as many surprises. And look, I mean, and that's not this. This is not a it's not a criticism in any way, because what we talked about earlier about marketing people and time is only magnified. You know
Mm,
this from your work, is only magnified when it comes to heads, right? I mean, the span, the scope of what a head has to deal with is enormous. So, but I think that you need to kind of get your hands dirty a little bit, and start meeting with people, and looking at data. And then the other thing I would say is start talking to parents. Start making sure that you're in touch with parents. You're talking to, particularly to current parents, about where they're at, what they're thinking, what do they see in the marketplace, what are their what are their what are the people in their network doing, what are their peers, their friends, their family members who have school age children, what choices are they making, what do they see, what do they hear? Because I think that that incredibly valuable source of information. I mean, when you talked about doing qualitative research. I mean, when I meet with when I do that work for a school, I always want to talk to parents who are new to the school, like 1 year in, 2 years in. And that's for two reasons. I mean, one is they actually remember why they chose the school. I mean, parents who've been there for a while don't necessarily remember. But the second is that they're tapped into all of these other networks. And if I say to them, what's the word on the street about XYZ Academy, they know, they have the answer to that question. So I think that heads can do the same thing. Heads can just start talking to people, asking questions, and they'll begin to get, I think, a good enough read to be able to help them navigate. But and they're going to have to get involved. I mean, they're going to if a lot of this stuff is going on, then somebody's got to supply the direction. And who else is that going to be? I mean, it could be, I mean, we could be talking about leadership broadly, so it may not be a head. There could be an assistant head who's got some responsibility for enrollment or advancement, or things like that. But somebody on that leadership plane is going to have to you roll up their sleeves, I think.
Chuck, if somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to do that?
Chuck at englishmarketingworks.com.
Great.
And let me just say that I would, I mean, forget about, whether this is for business or just to talk. Something I love talking about, do it all the time. And somebody wants just to have a conversation about any of this, it would be my pleasure.
Chuck English, English Marketing Works, thanks again for joining us today. I really do appreciate it. And for those of you who are part of Moonshot Lab, hang tight. We're going to have the extended interview in just a second. But Chuck, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Okay. You take care, Peter.